My name is Mary Ann Holloway. I'm 67 years old, and if you'd asked anyone in town about me 10 years ago, they would have said the same thing. She's such a good wife. Good, like dependable, like polite, like invisible. I heard it at church, at the grocery store, at barbecues where my husband held court with his stories, and I quietly refilled drinks behind him like a ghost with a pitcher. Oh, how lucky you are, Mary Ann. Paul's such a presence. And I'd smile, because that's what good wives do. They smile, even when their teeth ache from clenching, even when their skin itches from all the swallowed words trying to claw their way out, even when they're so tired they forget what they look like without the mask. But here's the truth. I wasn't born good. I was made into it, molded, sanded down, polished until the sharp parts stopped showing. It started young, like it often does. My mother was a seamstress, my father a quiet man who only spoke to correct or dismiss. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about chores, about being respectable, about not making scenes. Don't air your laundry, Mama used to say. People have enough of their own. So I learned early that pain is something you fold neatly and tuck under the bed. And love? Love was quiet endurance. When I met Paul Holloway, I thought I'd found something else, something better. He was tall, charming, the kind of man who could light up a room and make you feel like you were the only one he saw. He used to bring me tulips, said roses were too obvious, that I was softer, quieter. You're like a tulip, Mary Ann, he said once. Delicate, understated, the kind of beauty you have to earn the right to notice. And I, God help me, I thought that was poetry. We married when I was 21, fresh out of secretarial school. My mother cried happy tears. My father nodded in approval. You've done well, he said. Paul will take care of you. But they never asked what it would cost me to be taken care of. The first year was good, mostly. He liked things a certain way. Shoes by the door, towels folded in thirds, dinner ready by 6. He didn't yell, not then, just corrected, suggested. Maybe don't wear that dress, it's a bit loud. Why'd you make chicken again? Didn't I say I was in the mood for beef? Don't wait up, sweetheart. I've got a meeting with the guys. Little things, tiny abrasions that didn't leave marks, but stung just the same. I told myself it was marriage, that this was normal, that love wasn't supposed to be easy. Then the business started doing well. Paul had opened a construction firm with his brother, a 2-man operation with more ambition than resources. But he had a silver tongue and a ruthless streak, and before long, he was building half the town. People started knowing our name, saying it like it meant something. Holloway's putting in the new strip mall. Holloway got that contract from the county. And with every deal Paul won, he stood taller. And I shrank. He started working late more often, started coming home with the smell of whiskey on his breath, and perfume that wasn't mine clinging to his coat. I wasn't stupid, just slow to admit things, because admitting meant choosing. And I didn't have a choice. I hadn't worked since the wedding. My savings were gone. Everything we had was in his name. So I smiled. I made pot roast. I washed the perfume out of his collars, because that's what a good wife does. She doesn't ask questions when the answers might ruin everything. But what I didn't know, what no one told me, is that pretending everything's fine doesn't keep it from breaking. It just breaks you first. And that was only the beginning. The affair wasn't the worst part. Not really. Don't get me wrong, it hurt. That dull, marrow-deep kind of hurt that doesn't bleed but festers. You see, when you spend years building your life around a man's moods, his needs, his ego, and then you catch him giving pieces of himself to someone who didn't earn the bruises you carry, that's not just betrayal, that's erasure. But what really broke me? It was how easy it was for him to lie to me, how ordinary he made it look. The lipstick on the receipts, the late night business trips, the sudden passwords on everything, none of it was subtle. But Paul never worried about being caught, because deep down he knew I'd never leave. He knew I couldn't. We had 2 kids by then, Emily and Travis. And if there was anything left of myself, I poured it into them. Lunches packed with handwritten notes, costumes sewn by hand for Halloween, late-night fevers, scraped knees, spelling words taped to the fridge. They were my anchor, my proof that I was more than a woman waiting by the window. But Paul treated fatherhood like a performance. He'd swoop in for birthday parties, shake hands with the other dads, kiss me on the cheek for the cameras. But at home, he barely looked at them unless they were making too much noise during Sports Center. Still, people said, "Oh, Mary Ann, your family is just beautiful." And I'd nod, smile, say thank you. No one ever asked if I was happy. Happiness wasn't part of the role. I was supposed to be grateful. To have the nice house, the clean kids, the husband who paid the bills on time and didn't hit me. That was the bar. As long as there were no bruises, there was no story. One night I got bold. It was late. The kids were at my sister's for a sleepover. I made dinner, lit a candle, tried to make it nice. I wore the navy blouse he used to like, the one with the tiny buttons that always took too long to fasten. He came in late, smelling of gin and something powdery, didn't say hello, just hung up his coat and muttered, "I already ate." That night, something in me cracked, not shattered, not yet, just cracked. I said quietly, "Who is she?" He didn't even blink. "You don't want to do this, Mary Ann." "I already am," he laughed. Not loud, just under his breath, like I was a child who'd overstepped. Then he turned to me, eyes cold and flat, and said, "You don't want to start digging, sweetheart, because you might not like what you find." And that was the moment. Not the lipstick, not the late nights. That sentence. Like I was some fragile thing to be warned, managed, kept in my place. Like I should be afraid of the truth instead of furious. It had been kept from me. I didn't cry, not then. I cleared the dishes, blew out the candle, went upstairs and sat at the edge of the bed until the house went dark. And then I started making notes. Not revenge, Not yet. Just a record. Bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds. The things a good wife isn't supposed to worry her pretty head about. But I wasn't trying to be a good wife anymore. I was trying to remember who I'd been before the silence got comfortable. The hardest part about waking up isn't the pain. It's realizing how long you've been asleep. I used to believe the weight I carried was love, that bending myself into the shape of someone else's comfort was just part of being a wife. That sacrifice was the currency women paid to keep the lights on and the neighbors smiling. But once you start seeing clearly, you can't unsee. And let me tell you, once I started keeping those records, something shifted in me. I began to watch Paul the way you watch a stranger on a crowded street. Close, careful, detached. I noticed how often he lied, not just to me, but to everyone, clients, coworkers, even our children. "You're the glue, Marianne," he used to say. "You hold it all together." But what he really meant was, "You clean up what I break." And I did. Every mess, every moment he lost his temper with the kids and then shrugged it off as stress. Every missed dinner, every smirk when I asked where he'd been. I covered for him like it was my job, because for a long time it was. People don't understand that being trapped isn't always about money or violence. Sometimes it's about the story you've told yourself for so long that you don't know how to write a new one. And mine was this. I was the good wife, the stable one, the woman who made sure the kids had structure, who kept the house running, who stayed even when it hurt. Leaving would have meant tearing up that story by the roots. And what would I plant in its place? The kids got older. Emily left for college, first in our family to do so. Travis started working construction with Paul, much to my dismay. I saw the way he mimicked his father's walk, the clipped tone he used with me when he was annoyed. "You worry too much, Mom," he'd say. "Dad's tough, but he gets things done." He didn't see the cracks, not yet, because Paul was always different around other people. He knew how to put on the face. He wasn't charming, he was convincing, and that's a far more dangerous thing. But there was one person who saw through him, my sister, Clara. She'd never liked him, not from the start. Said there was something about his smile that didn't reach his eyes. We drifted over the years. Paul didn't like me spending too much time with her, said she put ideas in my head. But after that night, the one with the navy blouse and the blown-out candle, I called her, and she didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "I've been waiting for you to remember who you are." She started coming by once a week. At first, we just drank coffee, talked around things. But one day, she brought a folder. Inside, information on joint assets, divorce law, financial protections. I remember staring at it like it was a foreign language. I said, "I don't even know where I'd go." And she said, "You don't have to know yet, but you do have to know you can." Those words stayed with me. You can. And that was the first time in decades I felt something like permission, the permission to want more. That was new and terrifying. Because once you allow yourself to imagine freedom, the The walls around you start to look a little thinner, a little shakier, and that voice you buried under casseroles and polite smiles starts whispering again. Maybe there's more than this. That whisper was loudest at night, when Paul was snoring beside me, reeking of bourbon and stale cologne, and I was lying there wide awake, staring at the ceiling I had painted myself 15 years ago. He didn't touch me anymore. Not really, not unless we were in public and he needed to perform affection like a trick. But I remembered how he used to. I remembered the boy who wrote me little notes on the backs of receipts when we were dating. "Your laugh is better than music," one said. I kept it in a box for years. But that boy was long gone. Or maybe he never existed at all, just another version of him designed to win me. I started volunteering at the local library. Paul didn't object. He barely noticed. He just said, "As long as it doesn't interfere with dinner," like I was a waitress, not a wife. But I went 3 days a week, and for a few hours, I wasn't anyone's wife. I was just Mary Ann, the older woman who helped children find books about dragons and spaceships and magical talking dogs. I'd forgotten how much I loved stories and how much I needed to write a new one for myself. There was one afternoon, clear, cool, late October. The trees were doing that show-off thing they do in fall, where even the dying feels like a celebration. I was shelving a stack of books when I saw a flyer pinned to the community board. Women's Circle, reclaiming space, reclaiming voice, ages 50 plus, no cost, no judgment, just truth. I don't know what made me take it, but I did. I folded it into my purse like a secret, like contraband. Paul never found it, wouldn't have cared if he had, probably. He was too busy chasing contracts and watching his reflection in the eyes of younger women. Still, I didn't tell him I was going. I told him I had a board meeting at the library. He grunted and handed me his dry cleaning ticket. That first meeting, I almost didn't walk in. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, hand frozen on the ignition. But then I saw another woman, gray hair in a tight bun, worn leather purse clutched to her chest, step out of her car and hesitate at the door. Our eyes met, and she nodded, just once, like she understood everything about me in that one moment. So I got out. I followed her in. There were 6 of us in that first circle. None of us spoke loudly. None of us made jokes. We were women who had lived too long in the shadows of men's ambition, too long behind the curtain of shoulds and musts. We didn't share our full stories that night, but we shared enough. And when I spoke, just my name, just a few lines about feeling a little lost lately, I felt something open in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Breath, space, a little crack of light. And that night, as I drove home under a sky dusted with stars, I thought to myself, I don't have to stay, not just in this marriage, in this version of me. It's strange the first time you hear yourself speak in a room where no one's trying to correct you, not interrupt, not roll their eyes, not sigh like your voice is just background noise to their more important thoughts. Just listen. That women's circle became my tether. Once a week, in a small room with flickering fluorescent lights and coffee that tasted like regret, we sat in mismatched chairs and told the truth. Not all at once, not perfectly, but piece by piece, like unwrapping something too fragile to tear open. There was Martha, who hadn't spoken to her daughter in 5 years because of a man neither of them talk about now. Linda, who left a marriage after 42 years and still felt guilty for being the one who walked away, even though he'd never once asked her what she wanted for dinner. And me, the good wife with the polite smile and the grocery lists organized by aisle. The woman who'd made herself so small she could walk through her own house without leaving a shadow. It was in that room I said the words out loud for the first time. I think he broke me. No one gasped. No one told me I was overreacting. No one reminded me that Paul never hit me or that I lived in a nice house. Martha just reached out and touched my hand. Soft, solid, like an anchor. That night I didn't go straight home. I sat in the Walmart parking lot and cried in the driver's seat for a full hour. Not because I was sad, but because grief has a way of backing up in the body when you've spent a lifetime pretending it doesn't belong to you. You cry for things that don't make sense in the moment. The burnt toast, the silent dinners, the way your name sounds when he says it like a chore. You cry because you remember who you were before the silences, before the folding, before the shrinking. And you cry because part of you is still in there, somewhere, waiting. That weekend, Paul went on a golf retreat with some of the other contractors. He didn't invite me. He never did. I was good for handshakes and casserole deliveries, not cocktails and clubhouses. He left Friday morning, and by Friday evening, I'd unlocked the attic for the first time in years. The heat was thick, the kind that hugs your neck and presses behind your eyes. But I didn't care. I was looking for something, my old sketchbooks. You see, before I was a wife, before I was Mary Ann Holloway of Holloway & Sons Construction, I used to draw. Landscapes, mostly, and faces. Always faces. I was obsessed with expressions, how sadness looked different in the corners of someone's mouth than it did in their eyes. I found the box under an old baby swing, dusted off the lid with trembling hands. And when I opened it, there I was. Me. Before. Page after page of soft, graphite lines, eyes full of questions, smiles that weren't forced. I ran my fingers across one of the drawings. A girl sitting on a park bench, knees pulled to her chest, hair wild around her shoulders. I don't know who she was. Maybe a stranger, maybe me. But I wept like I'd found a lost child. And in a way, I had. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, those days were starting to fade, but because I was awake. Fully, wildly, terrifyingly awake. I spread those old sketchbooks across the bed like a map of someone I used to know. Pages worn at the edges, corners folded like bookmarks, left by a version of me who thought she'd come back sooner. I thought about all the things I'd put aside over the years: drawing, laughter, music, myself. And for what? A man who hadn't asked how I was in 15 years. A house that looked like a magazine cover but felt like a mausoleum. A life built on being agreeable, digestible, manageable. That Saturday, I made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no suitcase on the porch, just a quiet, clear promise to myself: I will not disappear in this house anymore. I started small. I moved my sketchbooks downstairs, not hidden in a drawer, not tucked away like contraband, but right on the coffee table, next to the TV remote where Paul couldn't ignore them. Then I signed up for a local art class at the community college. I told Paul it was a women's enrichment thing. He didn't even look up from his paper. Fine, just don't expect me to hang any of that stuff in the foyer. I almost laughed, because that's who he still thought I was, the woman who needed his approval to matter. But I didn't respond. That silence was mine now. The first class was on a Monday. I was the oldest person in the room. Most of the others were 20-somethings with tattoos and bright hair and sketch pads, covered in surreal dreamscapes and half-finished monsters. But no one looked at me like I didn't belong. And when I started to draw, when my hand remembered what my heart had forgotten, I felt something click back into place. A piece of me I hadn't even realized was missing. I drew a tree that day. Simple. Just a big oak with twisted roots and heavy limbs stretching off the page. But when the professor walked by and said, "That's got weight to it," I almost cried, because no one had said that about me in years, that I carried something real, something heavy, something worth looking at. When I got home that night, Paul was already in bed. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him snore, mouth slightly open, a whiskey glass on the nightstand. He looked so small, and I felt so big, not in a prideful way, not in a spiteful way, but in a way I hadn't felt since I was 20 years old, standing on a train platform with a sketch pad under my arm and the whole damn world waiting in the distance. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and began drawing before the sun even rose. It was a woman this time, her eyes closed, face turned upward, hands open like she was surrendering to the wind. She looked peaceful. She looked like someone I wanted to become. Paul came down mid-morning, rubbing his eyes. He glanced at the drawing, at the pencils spread across the table. He didn't say anything, but he looked unsettled, as if he couldn't figure out where the good wife had gone. And the truth was, she hadn't left. She had returned. I didn't expect it to happen that day. No big fight, no thrown plates, no dramatic final straw. Just a moment, small, sharp, unmistakable. It was Tuesday, late afternoon. I'd spent the morning at the library with the kids' reading group, then stopped by the art supply store on Main, bought myself a new set of charcoal pencils and a sketch pad that didn't have history bleeding through every page. When I got home, Paul was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a scotch in hand, even though he'd long since stopped pretending to save that for the evenings. He didn't look up, just said, "The hell are you doing spending money on crayons?" I froze in the doorway, not because I was scared, but because I realized I wasn't. I set the bag on the counter, calm, steady. "They're for me," I said. Paul snorted. "You're almost 70, Marianne. What the hell do you need to draw for?" I walked to the sink, filled the kettle, set it on the stove. He watched me like he was waiting for me to back down, apologize, tuck myself back into the shape he found convenient. But I didn't. I turned around, leaned on the counter, looked him dead in the eyes, and I said, "Do you know the last time you asked me if I was happy?" He didn't answer, just blinked like I'd spoken a foreign language. 41 years, I said. 41 years, I made your meals, kept your secrets, swallowed your silence, and you never once asked. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to deflect, but I raised a hand. "I'm not looking for a fight, Paul. I'm just done pretending." He stood then, all 6 feet of him, shoulders still broad, chest puffed like he thought size still mattered in this house. "What's this about? That group? The art class? You think they're going to fix you?" I smiled, and I swear to God, it shook him. "No," I said. "They didn't fix me. They reminded me I was never broken." The kettle began to whistle. I turned off the burner, poured my tea. He was still standing there, but somehow he looked smaller than ever. "Are you leaving me?" he asked, voice tight. I stirred honey into the cup. "I don't know yet." It was the truth. I hadn't made that decision, not entirely, but I was making every other decision without him now. That alone was enough to unnerve him. He sank back into the chair, didn't speak again. And I realized something then, as I stood in that kitchen with steam rising from my mug and the sun stretching across the floor like a slow golden exhale. He'd depended on my silence. That had been his power, not his voice, not his fists, not his charm, my silence. And now that it was gone, he didn't know who he was anymore. Later that week, I told Emily. We were walking in the park, leaves crunching under our feet, her toddler asleep in the stroller between us. "I'm thinking about leaving your father." She didn't gasp, didn't cry, just reached out and touched my arm and said, "What took you so long?" I stopped walking. She turned to me, and there were tears in her eyes, but not shock, not confusion, just knowing. "I saw more than you think," she whispered, "and I always hoped you'd see it too." I cried then, right there on the path with leaves falling like confetti and my granddaughter snoring gently between us, because for the first time in my life I felt seen. Not as a good wife, not as a patient woman, but as a person, a mother, an artist, a soul, trying to breathe again. I didn't leave the house with a suitcase in one hand and a letter on the table. It wasn't like the movies. There was no thunderstorm, no screaming match, no scene. I left the way women like me always do, quietly, with a key dropped into a drawer and a door that closed behind me, softer than a whisper. It took me 3 months. 3 months of therapy at the Women's Center. 3 months of gathering documents, meeting with a lawyer Clara recommended, and finding a little duplex on Sycamore Street that smelled like paint and possibility. Paul didn't fight me, didn't plead or rage or beg me to stay. He just said, "If this is what you think you need." And for once, I didn't flinch at the way he said it, because yes, it was what I needed, what I had needed for a long, long time. The day I moved out, Travis came to help. He didn't say much at first, just lifted boxes into the truck with his jaw clenched and his eyes a little too red for the wind to be the only reason. But when we were done and I stood there on the front lawn, looking up at the house I'd tried to make into a home, he turned to me and said, "I didn't understand when I was younger. I do now." That was all. But it was everything. He hugged me hard, like he was trying to squeeze all the years of silence out of both of us. And then he left, and I got in my own car, my car, registered in my name, and drove toward the rest of my life. The duplex was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, creaky floorboards, and a garden that hadn't been loved in years. But it was mine. I painted the kitchen yellow, hung my own art on the walls, joined another drawing class, this one held in an old firehouse with bad lighting and mismatched chairs, started baking again, not because anyone expected it, but because I liked the way cinnamon made the whole place smell like safety. Emily came by with her daughter every Sunday. We painted rocks in the backyard and read books on the porch swing. Travis stopped in on Thursdays after work. Sometimes he'd bring pizza, sometimes just himself and tired eyes. He never stayed long, but he always asked how I was doing. Not what's for dinner, not did you see where I left my charger? Just, how are you? And I'd answer honestly, because I could, because I'd built a space where my voice didn't have to fight to be heard, where it didn't echo, didn't shrink, didn't crack under the weight of someone else's expectations. One day in April, I framed the drawing of the woman with her eyes closed, hands open to the wind. The one I sketched that first week after finding my old self in the attic. I hung it in the hallway, and every time I pass it, I touch the frame. Not like a habit, like a prayer, a reminder of who I chose to become. Paul and I still speak, occasionally, mostly about logistics, bank accounts, holidays, whatever's left to sort. He doesn't ask questions anymore. He doesn't know who I am now. And that's okay, because I do. And for the first time in my life, that's enough. They called me a good wife. I carried that title like a medal and a chain. But what they didn't see, what they never asked, was the price I paid to earn it, the voice I buried, the art I abandoned, the girl I left behind in the name of being enough. But I found her again. And she was waiting, not angry, not bitter, just patient. And when I asked her if it was too late to start over, she smiled and said, "We've only just begun."